Alright friends, we're back, and it's been a while since I've done a Q&A video, so I thought now would be a good time, especially since it was a hell level, and I was in City of Mist for most of it, so I figured, why not do some Q&A with some post-commentary. I've gotten a few questions, but I'm going to start with these three. I've got some interesting footage for you to look at while I do this post-commentary with the Q&As, including me getting my group killed, well, my tank killed in a group in City of Mist, at a camp that I like better than that stable camp that I showed you a couple videos ago. Because I had total rookie cleric mistake. I had Divine Aura on, so I couldn't heal the tank, and I ended up getting killed. Yeah, my bad. Rookie mistake, like I said. I've got some footage of me, because the last video I did where I was in EverQuest getting my butt kicked by Miragel and Ice Giants, I was already in that part of Antonica, so I was like, hey, why don't I go to the sewers and show you the sewers of Quenos? Quenos, I don't know how to say it. And you'll see me, because I'm like, hey, I'm a Bertoxus following Gnome, so let me see how welcome I am there. And you'll see me paranoidly conning everything from a distance just in case I'm KOS to anyone. And I got a little bonus footage for you, some sewers, speaking of sewers, exploring under City of Mist, the sewers there, and some other stuff that I won't get into, because I don't want to spoil it. So enjoy this Q&A, and enjoy me getting through this hell level. Okay, first question comes from Lake Caldera. I wonder if that's a real lake somewhere. And this guy just lives there. Alright, I have a question for your Q&A video, Sage. Why didn't you move on to World of Warcraft, or any other MMO? Do you feel that the next generation of MMOs were a step down from classic EQ? Yes. Or was it strictly a time thing? Wow, okay, great question. So, I mentioned just before that my guild basically died on EQ Live. EQ Dead, we should call it. That's such a bad joke. Because of stuff like World of Warcraft. Okay, I was of two minds when World of Warcraft came out. A couple of things about it bothered me, and I also sort of felt this weird sense of loyalty to EverQuest, and also it just kind of felt like everything you invested into this game, your character, your main, it all just like goes to crap, and you're starting from scratch in a brand new game, be it EverQuest 2 or World of Warcraft. Now here's the debate that I had with my buddy when we were talking about switching to either World of Warcraft or EverQuest 2. I said, I want to switch to EverQuest 2 because I feel comfortable. It's something that I know. You know, I know EverQuest. I don't know World of Warcraft. That's a brand new IP for me. I wasn't familiar with it. I never played any of the other Warcraft games that were around prior to World of Warcraft coming out. And I kind of felt like, what am I stepping into, you know? And my buddy was like, well, that's what I like about it. I like that it's new. And to be fair, he did play some of those older Warcraft games, like Warcraft 2, the real-time strategy type games. And I was like, you know, what if EverQuest 2 gives me an opportunity to re-explore Greater Fate Arc and Velius and all this other stuff that I loved about the original game? And that was my rationale for wanting to switch to EverQuest 2, despite the fact that I never actually played EverQuest 2. I made the argument for it, but I never actually did it. I was kind of torn on that. And then the other thing that I remember happening, well, okay, I did find the World of Warcraft IP, intellectual property, a little bit intimidating. I kind of felt like, what is this, like the 5th or 6th Warcraft game? I don't know anything about the previous. What am I stepping into here? It's almost like, am I watching the third movie? Am I watching Return of the Jedi when I haven't seen A New Hope or Empire Strikes Back yet? I don't want to do that. There was another aspect of it. Okay, at the time, I read a lot of Fires of Heaven message board. Not so much for the Fires of Heaven content, but for like the random people that it would attract. I found it entertaining. But I remember they did this thing during Planes of Power that really pissed me off. I just thought it was so stupid. And they seemed like such an entitled bunch. They did this thing where basically they didn't like that they couldn't all go into Plane of Time, because I think it had a 72-player raid limit. I understood what they were saying. They're like, hey, we've got 100 players. I'm just picking a number. They probably, I don't know what number they had in their guild. And they were like, we don't like that. We got to leave out like 30% of our guild if we want to raid a Plane of Time. That's totally fair. What I didn't like was they did this whole ultimatum thing where like, we are all going to cancel our accounts and every associated account if you do not acquiesce to our demands within 7 days or something silly like that. You might be saying, what the hell does that have to do with World of Warcraft? Well, the thing that I remember reading on the forums was that when the World of Warcraft designers they basically hired some of the Fires of Heaven people to be like consultants or maybe even developers. And I was just like, okay, not a fan of a lot of the moves that Fires of Heaven people have made. and now you're bringing these people on as part of your development process, either as consultants or actual developers. I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't know if it was some weird form of like protest, but I was just like, Now, to be fair, that's actually a great idea. Like, hey, EverQuest is the most popular MMO, and we're trying to dethrone it when our game, World of Warcraft, comes out. Let's talk to some of the people that are at the top of the EverQuest game. The Fires of Heaven people. The Legacy of Steel people. What was the third one that was always up there? There was another one. Shadows of... I don't know. Anyway, that rubbed me the wrong way. But to answer your question, it was mostly a time thing. Because that all happened around the time... Like, World of Warcraft came out sometime around when I graduated high school, and so then it was like, what are you gonna do? Like, honestly, I didn't really have the grades to go to college. Maybe EverQuest was part of that, by the way. I was working at Papa John's. I was delivering pizzas, and not that there's anything wrong with that. Granted, it was a good, honest job. Okay, I'm not making fun of anyone that works at Papa John's. I used to do it for a living. It's a good, honest living. I was also trying to take classes at a local community college. I was thinking about joining the army. I was going through this weird phase of my life where I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had no idea what my future looked like. And yeah, MMOs just took a back seat to real life stuff. That's the real reason. Because as much as I can say, oh, the Fires of Heaven thing bothered me, and the EverQuest 2 seemed like a more stable product before they both came out. Obviously, World of Warcraft was more stable in the long run with the benefit of hindsight. Or like, I didn't like that I was starting from scratch. All that crap goes out the window if I had the time to dedicate to playing an MMO, because I really wasn't... I was playing like single player games at this point. When we were talking like 2005, 2006, after I graduated from high school and I was trying to figure out my life, yeah, I only had time for the occasional single player game. I mean, MMOs were just not in the cards for me at that time. So that's the main reason. Now let's talk about your question here. Do you feel the next generation of MMOs were a step down from classic EQ? Here is one other thing that bothered me about the whole transition from EverQuest to either EverQuest 2 or World of Warcraft or any of the other stuff that came out after. They all seem to be either... It's hard to know what came first because I don't have an exact timeline, but there were certain things going on in World of Warcraft that even though I wasn't playing that game, I was aware of, like instancing, that made their way to EverQuest in the form of like Lost Dungeons and Norath, and I think they started to institute some instancing even in Planes of Power to some degree, and in the expansions that followed. I gotta be honest, I just didn't like that. I didn't like stuff like that I felt like was catering, and this kind of goes back to the Fires of Heaven, like, you don't want your player base making these demands that they're gonna quit if you don't do exactly what they say. The player base said that they wanted instanced zones and instanced quests and all that kind of stuff. And I just didn't, because to me, I saw the flaw in that design. Now, this is a subjective flaw. I'm saying it's a flaw. You might like it better with instancing. I think the idea of instancing sounds great, but the practical application of it to a game that is very social, I don't like. I just felt like it kind of offered easy mode, and I felt like one of the things that always made EverQuest so popular was that it was hard mode. There was no easy mode in EverQuest. It was freaking hard, man. It was a hard game, and the game just punished the hell out of you. And I truly believe that, especially early on, that is what kept players coming back for more. Now, if we talk about... A lot of people look at EverQuest as all the servers. You know, I played on TuneAir. There's player versus environment servers, and there's player versus player servers. Those are the two categories. Well... kind of, yeah, but here's the thing. If you ever, even on a player versus environment server, if you ever raced another guild to get to a raid mob, you had a player versus player experience. If you ever got outbid on an item in East Commonlands or on my server, Greater Fate Arc, you had a player versus player experience. If you ever died while trying to camp a mob and someone came and took your camp after you died, and you knew that they were kind of watching you, waiting for you to die, you had a player versus player experience. And that is one of the things that made EverQuest so great to me. And I knew that that was going to be either diminished or outright eliminated on these future games. Now, I'm not saying that there are no plus sides to instancing and there's no downsides to non-instance games, because, yeah, having to wait in line to get a piece for your epic, that sucks. Having to wait in line to get Ancient Cyclops, you know, stuff like that is awful. and their total time sinks. I get that. But the net effect of being in the same world as other players and having to compete with not only the mob that you're trying to kill, you not only have to figure out how to kill Avatar of War, but you need to figure out how to get to Avatar of War before your opponent does. And your opponent being another guild. Losing that to me kind of sucked some of the magic out of it. Now, the one thing I've never talked about on this channel, maybe I might have mentioned it briefly, is Pantheon. As I've said, I never played a single MMO besides EverQuest. And I'm not going to count games like Demon's Souls that did technically have an online component, but it wasn't an MMO. Because that was technically another player coming into your world, not everyone being in the same world. Pantheon is a game that I've been following for a long time. It's been in development for a long time. There's some arguments about what the heck is the status of Pantheon. I think I donated like $50 in 2016 or 17. I don't even know like what is going on with that whole thing. I know that after Brad McQuaid died, something had to have been derailed, and it was a major blow to that whole project. I don't even know if it's ever going to come out. Pantheon was kind of my one hope. I say that with an asterisk. There was briefly something called EverQuest Next in development. I don't know what happened with that, but I think it got canceled. That also seemed promising. But the fact that Brad McQuaid was one of the people behind Pantheon really got me excited. And then, when he died, it was like, obviously a horrible tragedy for someone to die that young, and someone who I think was brilliant. But it was also like, oh man, that probably means Pantheon is going to get derailed here. Maybe it still comes out. Like, I like to be optimistic about these things, but obviously that is looking pretty grim right now. But I do hope that something happens with that. Okay, next question comes to us from Shimapanzer9930, and he asked, to add to the future AMA, did you ever consider yourself a hardcore player? I know you've talked in the past about raiding, but did you ever think of yourself as a hardcore? Yes, there were 2 occasions where I thought of myself as a hardcore player. Maybe the first one was semi-hardcore, and that was on live. And then the one where it felt even more hardcore was actually on P99 Blue. So I'll talk about those both separately. First, I'll talk about live, since that's sequentially what happened first. This was back in... Okay, a little bit of backstory. My main character, I played on the Tuner server. My main character was a Dark Elf Warrior. And I had a few alts that I enjoyed. I got my Dark Elf Warrior to about level 56, I believe. That's when I was just kind of like, you know what? This is not the class for me. I've been forcing this for a while. Really not enjoying this too much. I got an alt that I enjoy more, which was an Ixar Shaman. That Shaman was probably about level 33-ish by the time I decided. I don't think I ever made a formal declaration of like, this is now my main, but I got him, I started playing him exclusively, and I got him up pretty high to the point where I'm passing my main, so it becomes my main. So let's say around level 58 on my Shaman, and this was probably, Plains of Power was probably the latest and greatest expansion when this happened. I'm in, maybe it was Luckland actually, I can't remember. But I'm level 58, and I'm in a pickup group somewhere in Luckland, I don't remember where. This is what makes me think it was Luckland, because I don't think, once Plains of Power came out, no one really did pickup groups in Plains or in Luckland, because everyone thought of it as an inferior expansion. So there's this guy in my group, a paladin. I remember specifically a half-elf paladin, whose name was something like Paulo or Paulie, had Paul in the name. He was like, hey man, I'm the recruiting officer for my guild. I was wondering if you wanted to join my guild. And the guild was called Aqua Flame. I know that sounds like a contradiction of terms, but Aqua Flame, one word. And I sort of was aware of the guild. I was aware of most of the raiding guilds on my server. And this was not a high-end raid guild by any means. It was like, I would call it like a tier 3. Like, not quite at the level of a casual raid guild, but they were always at least 1, maybe 1.5 expansions behind. Like, if Luckland was the latest and greatest, they were raiding, mid-level Velious stuff, tracking on. If Plains of Power was the latest and greatest expansion, they were doing maybe some early planar stuff, like maybe Plane of Storms, Bastion of Thunder, but mostly they were trying to do like high-end Temple Sragia stuff, Burrower Beast, all that kind of stuff, and some North Temple of Vishan. So I was aware of them, but they kind of had a weird reputation, and if anyone played on the Tuner server, you might even remember Aqua Flame. Not the best reputation, but it was also kind of a small guild. And I think one of the reasons they had that reputation now on reflection was there was a language barrier. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But basically, I rebuffed this guy. I was like, no, I don't want to join your guild. I'm not interested in joining a guild. And I was guildless for most of my playing career. And I grouped with him like a week later in like another random pickup group, just by happenstance. We're in the same group. And he's like, hey, man, any reconsideration? And I was like, you know what? I kind of have been thinking about it. And because I had kept some of the Aquaflame people on my friends list, and I was frequently doing Who All Aquaflame, seeing what they were rating. I saw they were doing some North Temple Vishan stuff and mid to high end Luckland stuff. I was like, kind of interested. So I was like, sure, why not? I'll give it a go. And he basically just invited me. I don't remember if there's any kind of trial period. So the reason why there's a language barrier is this guild, even though this guy was based in the US and like he spoke English as his native language, there was the majority of the guild was from Hong Kong, but living in Toronto. And English was not their first language. In fact, some of them had no English. I remember specifically there was this monk in the guild named Chiang's. And they were like, don't even bother talking to him because he literally can't speak English. So, and this was before voice and all that stuff. So anyway, I joined this guild, and long story short on that guild, I really enjoyed it. Like, one of the reputations was that they were like kind of dicks because they would ignore other guilds if they were in competition for mobs. But again, I think that was mostly a language barrier thing. There were a few people that were North American because of the time zone, that were like native North American, but a lot of, I would say it was like 40% of the guild was the Hong Kong people in Toronto, and they kind of ran things, and the rest of us were kind of just along for the ride. And we all got along, like even with the limited language barrier. But they also had a reputation for doing raid targets with smaller numbers than most guilds, like not the stereotypical Zerg guild. And I really like that. Like every person in each raid felt impactful. Because we were doing like, I remember the first time we did Empress Sragia, we had like 38 people, which at the time was kind of impressive. Granted, this was during Planes of Power, so you had the level 65 and all that stuff. Anyway, that guild fell apart for two reasons. Number one, we finally killed Empress Sragia, and we got the fragment for the key to Vexthal. And Vexthal, as you may remember, getting the key for that zone was a giant train wreck, and the guild was basically split down the middle. Should we focus on Planes of Power, or should we bother getting the Vexthal key? And half the guild was like, just get the key. You're just being lazy. You don't want to get the key. I know it's a pain in the ass to get this key to Vexthal, but just do it. The other half was like, no, we don't want to. It's not worth it. The loot is better in Planes of Power. You know, Planes of Power is the future. Luckland is the past. Let's not bother. That combined with leadership change, the guild basically just fell apart. Now, the interesting thing is, it mostly fell apart, but a lot of the remaining members joined another guild called Wish of Challenge. And the name to this day cracks me up. Wish of Challenge. It usually went by WOC. The problem with WOC is, and the reason why most of the players flipped over to that guild, they were actually in Hong Kong. Like the bulk, that one was like 85% Hong Kong people. Like literally in Hong Kong. They were like, hey, they were friends with the leadership in Aquaflame. In fact, a lot of the people in Aquaflame knew in real life from back when they lived in Hong Kong, the people in Wish Challenge. And they would talk to each other and stuff. They were basically like, hey, Aquaflame's falling apart. Open invite if you want to join us. Just know that there's a huge time change difference. And also the language barrier is even worse because like very few of these people spoke English in Wish of Challenge. Enough to like, you know, get by like casting CH or go to Plane of Storms or whatever. Like they could say stuff like that, but you couldn't have an in-depth conversation with them. So I was at a weird point in my life where the time difference actually was doable for me. They were also a higher end guild. So Aquaflame was probably like tier 3, like somewhere between casual and hardcore. Wish of Challenge was probably like tier 2, maybe borderline tier 1, because they were doing, when I joined them, they were keying people up for Plane of Time. And I think I was with them when they did their first Plane of Time raid. Because I think I remember the one that they couldn't do was the Earth Elemental to get that part of the flag to get the Plane of Time. And after the Aquaflame people joined, they were finally able to do it, like push them over the edge. So I joined Wish of Challenge. The only problem was, because of the time difference, I was waking up at like 7 a.m. to join these raids, because I guess 7 a.m. was like 8 or 9 p.m. in their time. 7 a.m. Eastern. I was just like, whatever, this is my life now. And we would raid like every day, 7 a.m. until like maybe like 8 a.m. until about noon my time. It was weird. And of course, you know, my friends and family were like, what the hell are you doing? But again, I was in this weird point in my life. I was able to do it. And I was like, why the hell not, you know? We did elementals. We did Plane of Time. Plane of Time was really fun. I really liked it. We started to do some. At this point, this is probably late 04, early 05. And the guild's starting to fall apart for a couple of reasons. Number one, the content just wasn't as good. Like, they were putting out Gates of Discord, maybe Omens of War might have been one of the ones that was out. And I don't even remember what the hell came out after that, because I was tuned out after that. And at the same time, World of Warcraft, the elephant in the room. World of Warcraft had come out. Also, EverQuest 2 was out, and some people just switched over to that. So the guild was losing population, and it slowly died out. And it was weird, because there was never that moment of like, hey guys, not enough people are logging on, the guild's over, goodbye, good luck. There was no like official, it was just kind of a slow burnout. And it was kind of sad, actually. But I remember one of my friends, I recruited one of my real life friends to join the guild. I was like, he was a ranger, level 60, 65, I guess. I was like, yeah, you gotta join. This is a great guild, you know, they don't really speak English, but they get shit done. And he was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I got him in on like a trial basis, and he raided with us for like a week. And he was like, dude, you're nuts. He's like, you're waking up at 7 a.m. to raid with these people. They don't even speak the same language as you. Like, you're nuts. And I go, yeah, I am nuts. You're right. I am. But I enjoy it. And it was weird. It was like this cultural exposure thing, because I was able to have very basic conversations with some of these people. That apparently Usher was big in Hong Kong at the time. And all the stuff that's been going on in Hong Kong these past couple years makes me just kind of wonder about them. You know, like, I hope they're doing okay. Now, if that wasn't hardcore enough for you, okay. I actually want to make a larger video about this at some point, but I want to talk about the raiding I did on P99. Now, technically, I did join a raid guild in 2010, and I hated it, because this is when the era of, and I hate this term, but they were using the term poop socking. Basically, the planes had just come out on the very first P99 server, Blue. And these people were like, yeah, you need to just like sit at the entrance of Plane of Hate until something spawns. That's your life now. And I was like, no, it's not. I'm out. I just quit the guild. I couldn't even tell you the name of the guild back then. Let's fast forward to 2015. I'm going to do a larger video about this at some point. It's something that's been on my mind. I basically hated raiding on P99, and I'll talk about why. But I want to give more of the backstory when I do a video about this. I'll try to keep it shorter. I can't guarantee it'll be short. Here's what happened. I was a wizard. I was in a guild. In fact, I'll show you the wizard right now. His name was Jerome, and it used to really piss me off when people would pronounce it as Jeremy, which, by the way, that is not my name in real life, which is another thing people think you try to do when you have a name like that. But it was pronounced like the word Jerome, the name Jerome, with an E at the end. Jerome. And there was a character on a sitcom in the 80s that had that name, Jerome. I can't even remember the name of the sitcom. But anyway, I just thought it was a funny name, so I picked it. Now, here's what happened. I'm in a small-ish guild based on a character that I had before on an account that got hacked. It's a long story. That guild gets absorbed by another guild, and this was probably 2014, late. And then early 2015, that guild is bigger now than the small guild that I joined, but it also gets absorbed. Now, keep in mind, 2015 is when Velius came out, and everyone knew Velius was coming. Kunar came out, I want to say 2011, and then Velius came out in August or July of 2015. So that's a pretty sizable gap. That's like a 4-year gap, 4.5 maybe. People were very much anticipating Velius coming out on P99. And at this point it was blue and red. There was no green, there was no teal, and red was obviously a lot smaller than blue. Blue was the main deal. So when Velius was coming out, there were 2 primary raid guilds. The guild that I was in that was small, that got absorbed by the medium-sized guild, got absorbed by one of those larger guilds. And I don't, like, the backyard politics of how the absorptions happen, I couldn't tell you. The mergers, the acquisitions, all that crap, I don't know. All I know is I was playing my wizard and we get absorbed. They're like, hey, you're in this guild now. And then 6 months later, it's like, hey, now you're in this guild. It's like, okay, whatever. And then there was like officer forum votes behind the scenes. Like, do you want to do this merger? And I was just always just along for the ride. I didn't really care. But knowing that Velius was coming out, I wanted to be in the raid guild. I like the idea of like, hey, I want to do Entov. I want to do Avatar War. I want to do Plane of Growth. I want to do all that stuff that on live, I was only really able to do 2 or 3 expansions later, right? Like, I only saw Entov when Luckland was the latest and greatest. So I really like the idea of doing raiding. Now, there were 2 main guilds at the top, and now I find myself in one of them, and we're prepping for Velius launching. And I'm not a part of the discussions, because I'm just a regular guild member. I'm not an officer, I'm not any of that crap. There's some discussions about, what do we do on launch day? Do we go straight to Avatar War, Tormax, Yellonak, North Temple of Vishan? Do we do Arianor? Like, what do we do on day 1? And so I knew it was going to be chaotic. Oh, and by the way, you'll see that this character has a a title. That's another story for another day, but I got it from a GM event. So Velius is coming out. I hope I don't have the year wrong. I'm pretty sure it was summer of 2015. It might have been 2016, but I think it was 2015. The guild is, for the most part, led by this guy named Pint. That was his character's name. Pint was an officer. He was not the leader, technically leader of the guild, but he was like functionally the guy that ran the show. And he was really cool. I liked him a lot. His main character, Pint, was, you know, like a pint of beer, was a dwarf paladin. However, because paladins don't have a huge role on raids, he almost always, like I would say 90% of the time in raid situations, was playing his alt, which was a level 60 dark elf cleric named Innie. I-N-N-I-E. Or maybe it was Inky. I think it was Innie. For those of you that were around back then, you'll remember who I'm talking about. And this was, unlike all the live days when I raided, when there was no voice stuff, this was all, like, a lot of the coordination was done over voice. I never really talked on it, but I heard all the voices, and this is going to sound really weird. I'm a big voice guy. I love this guy's Pint's voice. It was so soothing. Even though he was, like, the leader of the raids, and he would be yelling at us and telling us what to do, he had such a weird, soothing voice. It was a very southern accent. I believe he said he was from Alabama. It was like one of those voices where the person's voice always sounds like they're straining their vocal cords, but they're not actually. They're just like, that's just how they sound. Like, God, I could try to do an impression here, but imagine a very southern accent with someone who sounds like they lost their voice, but not in like a bad, raspy way, in a way that just makes them sound kind of like choking or something. I don't know. I'm making it sound bad, but he actually had a very pleasant voice to listen to. And it was rare that he would get really mad and start yelling. I really liked him. I rarely interacted with him one-on-one because, look, I'm a wizard, right? Like, what role does a wizard really have on a raid guild, on a server where people are like, why aren't you a rogue? If you wanted to do DPS, you should have been a rogue or a monk. That was kind of the mentality. There were not many wizards in the guild. I probably wouldn't have gotten in if I wasn't already in the guild that got absorbed. They would have been like, we don't really do wizards, so bye. Anyway, I was in. I got grandfathered in, I guess. Here's the problem. Velius comes out. We start raiding. I loved it. You know, that night that Velius came out, I remember like running through Ice-Clad Ocean, all that stuff. Like, it was so much fun. It got pretty hardcore. It got pretty hardcore pretty fast. I can't even remember the name of the guild. I know this sounds crazy. One of the guilds was called Asgard, but I can't remember if that was the raid guild or the guild that got absorbed into the raid guild, or if that was even the first guild that got absorbed by the second guild, which ultimately got absorbed into the third guild. I know this is all a lot to track. For those of you that remember, I mean, I could probably look up archive forum posts on P99's forum, but it was one of the two main raid guilds. The other one was something like the A-Team or SEAL Team, or it was something like that. It had a shorter name. I think Asgard wasn't the name of the final guild, but I can't remember the name of the guild that Pint was basically the guy who ran the show. But I was in that one. So we start out doing NTOV, and it's exactly what you would want from a server that's, you know, an emulated progression server. You start out, you go to Arianor, you do Arianor, and then you're like, okay, do we go left or right? Well, right's a little bit easier. We'll go the right side of the path. If you don't know what I'm talking about North Temple of Ishan. It's basically like a clock shape, the first part of it, with Vulak in the middle. And then after the clock shape, you've got like the Plane of Mischief zone, and you've got some other North Temple of Ishan dragons further down that way. Almost like an extension off of the number 12 on the clock. There's like 3 or 4 dragons past that. But most of them are in that big circle with the ring, and that's clock shape, the lava pit, with Arianor being the first one and Vulak being in the middle. So, you know, we start clearing all the trash, we go to Arianor, and this takes place over several days. And the hardcore element of it was you would go into whatever the chat service we use, which I think it was called Ventriloquo or something like that. We would have a special room that you would sit in if you were waiting for something to spawn. And then as soon as the thing spawned, whatever the raid target was, someone would come into that chat room and start yelling like, pop, 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 pop. And literally this would be happening at like 3 a.m. Like I'd be asleep, fast asleep, you know, got work the next morning at like 7 a.m. And I'm awoken at 3 a.m. by some guy yelling, pop, 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 pop. And I was living in this little studio apartment, so I'm sure my neighbors probably heard this too, because I had to have it up loud enough that it would wake me up. And then I would get out of bed, walk over to my computer, Again, it's a studio, so it was like one room. It was like 400 square feet. And I would be like, okay, what are we doing? Where am I going? Okay, I'm going to North Temple of Ishan. Got it. I'm already camped at the entrance. Great. Okay, what are we doing? We got Call a Hero. Great. Okay, we just killed this mob. Do the loot. Okay, cool. Go back to sleep. It was very hardcore. Like, who's waking up at 3 a.m.? And this is the kind of thing you can't do if you've got like a wife and kids. Like, you're going to get destroyed if you try to do that. And it was, again, a time in my life where I could just afford to do that crap. I didn't really care about showing up at work the next day all drowsy because I was woken up at 3 a.m. to kill some virtual dragon. Here's where things went off the rails and why I hated raiding on P99. First of all, there were accusations. There was so much drama with that other guild, the name of which I don't even remember. And I was not even, like, loyal. I thought the other guild were dicks. I thought we were dicks, too. I thought everyone was dicks, okay? They were worse dicks, but maybe that was just my bias. There were accusations that they had it in with the GMs, and then this stuff has been going on forever on P99. It's like, hey, the people that run this server, they're secretly in with that guild. That's why that guild gets all the mobs first. They would put up videos on YouTube trying to prove that the other guild had some sort of hacking, multi-quest, whatever the heck. Like, something was afoul about the whole thing. I remember one particular video that I was in. I wonder if it's still on YouTube, actually, where they tried to show that this dragon spawned, and it was unusual how quickly they were able to get aggro, therefore they had first to engage, and therefore the raid was theirs. Okay, that actually wasn't the part that bothered me. That was all like par for the course you expected at that level. What bothered me was we reached the point where the raids, specifically in North Temple of Ishan, turned into, and this is going to be hard for some of you to understand, so I'll try to explain it, but I am not by any means an expert on how this all went down. The raids were all done at the entrance of Temple of Ishan. Now, if you're wondering, like, wait, you were killing North Temple of Ishan dragons at the entrance of Temple of Ishan? What? How did that work? Yeah, it's really dumb. It's really stupid, and I hated it. And I understood why they did it, because it was a way to save time, so you don't have to clear all the trash. But that is so not in the spirit of the game, and it just sucked the enjoyment out of the whole process. Okay, here's how it worked. And if I have the details of this wrong, correct me. I'm pretty sure this is why they made those dragons perma-rooted at some point. Let's say you start out at the entrance, you got the whole guild right at the entrance to Temple of Ishan, right? You know where I'm talking about. You got the big orb floating above you. You've got the music playing, which I love. Someone, probably a monk, runs out and gets aggro on the very first trash mob, right outside that first door in Temple of Ishan. They take that aggro and they run with it. Now, as that monk runs, all the other mobs are going to get aggroed along the way, because if they're not aggroing the monk, then they're getting like train aggro onto the mob that's already been aggroed, or at this point, the mobs that have been aggroed. So this monk is basically running with a giant train. He runs all the way to North Temple of Ishan with this train of trash mobs, and there's someone else tailing behind him. Let's say it's another monk. And that other monk is not getting any aggro because the first monk carries all the aggro. So the first monk is running through North Temple of Ishan with this giant train of mobs all the way from the entrance. He tags the dragon, right? Let's say that the target is Lord Vem. I think it's pronounced Vem. I want to say Vyam, but you know who I'm talking about. He grabs that aggro along with his entire train, and he runs around, and Vyam and none of the dragons are perma-rooted at this point. And the second monk does something to grab aggro only on the target dragon, let's say Lord Vyam in this case. So the first monk has all the mobs in the zone aggroed. Not west, not east, but everything from the entrance through north. The second monk only has Lord Vyam's aggro. Now you might say, well, if Vyam is part of the train, then technically monk number 2 is picking up all the same aggro. Correct, but not until monk number 1 dies, because monk number 2 is using some sort of snare clicky or whatever to get aggro on Lord Vyam, to the point that it pulls aggro away from monk number 1 onto monk number 2. So that only Lord Vyam and that whole train of mobs, let's say there's like 150 mobs in that train, maybe that's an exaggeration, but it's some giant number. It might even be undercutting it, actually. Only Lord Vyam is on monk 2. All the other mobs are on monk number 1. So monk number 2, who now has only Lord Vyam on him, runs back to the entrance. And this, you could sub out Lord Vyam for Vulak, all that crap that's up there, okay? Lord Kadoikin, or whatever it's called, all that stuff. Monk number 2 runs to the entrance with Vyam, and there's a warrior, probably, waiting near the entrance. Not quite right at the entrance, but near the entrance. Monk number 2 feign deaths. The warrior hits Lord Vem with an arrow, Lord Vem then comes to the entrance, because the warrior then runs back into the entrance. Monk number 1 feigned deaths. Okay, so now monk number 1, or maybe he's zoned to Plane of Mischief, who knows, right? Like, whatever. The bottom line is, aggro has been completely wiped on both. Now you might be wondering, well, why wouldn't that entire train come running back to the entrance? Because Lord Vem, his aggro is exclusive to the warrior now that the monk number 2 is feigned death and monk number 1 has zoned out. It's a way, it's basically an exploitation of, I don't want to call it bad zone design, but obviously perma-rooting the dragons fixed this problem. But it was just a corny, cheesy, BS way to pull any North Temple of Ixan dragon to the entrance of the zone. And you might say, hey, that's convenient. That saves us time. We don't have to kill the trash mobs. I hated it. I hated knowing that, hey, we're going to kill 3 North Temple of Ixan mobs tonight. Hey, we're going to kill Vulak tonight. Oh, cool. I get to see Vulak's lair. No, you don't. You're going to be standing at the entrance. Like, that was just so boring to me. Now, at first, it was kind of cool. It's like, wow, I've never seen Vulak at the entrance. And I remember taking some screenshots and some videos, none of which I have currently, unfortunately, of this whole interaction of, like, Lord Vem at the entrance, Vulak Air at the entrance. But after a while, I was like, man, this kind of kills the whole point of the game. Because you have to ask yourself at a certain point, what is the point of me playing this game? I don't play the game so that I can sit at the entrance of, like, I don't consider that to be raiding Temple of Ixan. I consider raiding Temple of Ixan to be going to where Lord Vem spawns, going to where Vulak spawns. And I hated it. And eventually I was just like, I'm done, I'm out. And I had enough dragon points, or whatever they call DPK, DKP. I had enough of that to get the robe off of Vulak for my wizard, which was ironic because I didn't even have my epic, but I had enough to get the robe. And I was like, you know what? I don't even want it. I just feel dirty about all this. I hate this. Like, I did it for a while, but eventually I was just like, I'm done. And Pint stopped playing after a while because he got the items that he wanted, and maybe some other real life stuff was going on with him too. But as soon as he was kind of out, like, he wanted that Palladius Axe of the Slaughter from Vulak. He got it on his Paladin, which he could never really play because he always had to play his Cleric. And at that point, I think he was kind of like, all right, what's the point of me even playing this game anymore? And I was kind of the same way. I was like, for different reasons, I was just tuned out. So my understanding, and I basically stopped playing that character after that. This was probably mid-2016 by the time, maybe early to mid-2016, maybe like April, May of 2016. I was just like, yeah, I'm out. And plus other stuff was going on in my life where I'm like, nah, I think I'm done waking up at 3 a.m. to some nerd yelling pop, pop, pop so that I can kill some dragon at the entrance of Temple of Ixan. I got it out of my system. I had fun, but it wasn't fun toward the end. As soon as we started doing that crap where we pull everything to the entrance, I was just not that interested in it anymore. I actually switched over to playing a druid who was in his 40s at that point, and I enjoyed that a lot more. So, and I don't even know what happened to that guild. I mean, as far as I know, the top 1 or 2 guilds on either blue or green these days, it's always rotating. You know, it's never consistent because it's always like, oh, this guild's on top now for like 6 months, and then whatever happens, some drama or enough people quit and new people come on board, and now they're the top dogs. That guild's long gone because I logged in like a year or 2 ago and I wasn't even in a guild, so I'm like, oh, I guess the guild's just done. Or they removed me somehow, but I don't even think they existed anymore. Some of the same players still play on blue, but the guilds change. So those were my 2 experiences being hardcore. I know that was a long story, and I'm going to try to shorten this, but I do want to do a larger version where I kind of give you an example of how that looked, but that's your answer to your question. I know that's overkill. All right, last one here before I lull you all to sleep, if I haven't already. And you will see me ding level 41 and finally get through this hell level during this Q&A. All right, this is from Ryder Canfield 3721. He said, I recently started watching your videos, and the first video I stumbled on was your lore video regarding the Coldane. I love that format of storytelling when it comes to lore videos. Out of curiosity, do you have any plans to do more of those, and are the Teardoll and or Trolls on the list for possible lore videos? Keep up the amazing work. Thank you. So the Coldane video was what I kind of consider to be my first real video on this channel, and if you haven't seen it, I'll link it. It was the most popular video on my channel for a while. I think it's been usurped by another video by now. But anyway, that video took a lot of work, and to give you an idea of how much work it took, I started working on that video in May of 2019. I didn't publish it until June of 2020. Now, there are some caveats there. First of all, I had this really boring job at the time where there was a lot of downtime. I was working semi-overnight, and I decided, you know what I want to do? I want to make a channel, because this was really before I had even launched my channel. Technically, I created my channel in early 2019, but I don't think I uploaded anything until September, October of 2019. But anyway, I started work on the script. That was the first step. I started working on a script in May of 2019 for the cold name video. I'll admit that part of the reason why it took so long was because I was new to the whole video editing thing, and on top of that, I had to figure out a way, because you'll notice when you watch that video that I have a lot of NPCs doing stuff in places that they aren't supposed to be that is very complicated. The way I was able to achieve that was by starting my own server on the EQEmu page. Now that sounds a lot fancier than it really is. All that means is I launched a server where I could make myself a GM. I had to go into MySQL and do some stuff. There's this whole guide on the EQEmu page about starting your own server. When people think about starting your own server, they typically think of things like, oh, like the easy server or any of these random, shards of Delaya, like all these things where people are creating custom content based on EverQuest. That wasn't, I mean, honestly, P99 is even an example of that. That was not anything like I was trying to do. In fact, if you take a look at all these different servers when you launch the EQEmu thing, you're going to see most of them are empty. There's 0 people. That's what my server was. I created this server so that I could make myself a GM and I could manipulate all these NPCs to, spawn this NPC in this world when they normally wouldn't, and so on, so that I could make that cold name video. Now, the funny thing is, before I even made that server, I actually was using someone else's server that they made that they had just sort of abandoned. And like I said, most of these servers on this list that you see are empty. They're empty because people made them without the intention of anyone but them ever playing on it. And when they're not using it, it just sits there with 0 people on it. So I created my own server because the one that I was using, whoever made this server, they made it so that you could just kind of log in, make yourself a GM, and do whatever you wanted. And I started out just doing that. And this is before I even started filming or, scripting or anything like that. I just wanted to explore zones that I had very little experience with, like Sleeper's Tomb and Vishan's Peak and Vexthal, like all these zones where I was, or just nostalgic, right? Like zones that I haven't been to in a while that I wanted to check out as a GM, where I knew I wouldn't have to worry about my character getting attacked or dying or whatever. And it's the kind of thing where you log into this server, you instantly make yourself level 60 or 70 or whatever the max is. You make yourself a GM, and then you just kind of run around and look at stuff. And you've got the GM key, so that like a zone like Vexthal, which requires you to have all these different keys to maneuver through the zone. You don't have to worry about that. Use your magical GM key or something like that is the message you get. Anyway, that guy, whoever he was, the server shut down, and I had to figure out how to make my own when I wanted to do the cold name video. And it worked great, okay? Until it didn't, and here's why it didn't. All right, 2 things happened. First, my computer died in August of 2021. I dropped my hard drive while I was rendering a video for this channel. That's the irony. The only video I ever made that I lost and never got to upload. It still pisses me off to this day, almost 3 years later. I actually went through a whole data recovery service to try and get it back, and they ended up being like, yeah, your hard drive is so messed up we can't even help you. So here's your money back, something like that. It was a mess, and when I basically got a new hard drive for that computer, I had to do everything from scratch, everything, including setting up my own server. Now, at the time, I was more focused on recording P99 content, so I was like, let me punt on this. Now, you'll see here from the EQEmu homepage, it's still on their homepage. They were dealing with some sort of hacking issues not long after August of 2021. I think it was like October when some of these issues started up, where they basically said, we've been having issues with the login server. Someone has been packet flooding with what seems to be registration requests. And since the old login server incident is ancient and brittle, not sure we have the code. Basically saying they were getting attacked through some sort of DDoS thing, and here's a solution. Now, ever since they implemented this solution in the fall of 2021, I have not been able to get my server to work. I'll admit, I am not a tech wizard by any means. The fact that I was able to set this server up in the first place was a damn miracle as far as I'm concerned, because I do not understand all this stuff with MySQL and some sort of database I had to go into and edit and make myself a GM. And like I've got this whole thing with like the install guide where you use the Perl and MariaDB and all this stuff. Like I was able to get that to work. I'm not an idiot. I was able to get that stuff to work. However, ever since they made this change because of this DDoS thing, I have not been able to get my server to work. So here's where I'm going to reach out to you, the viewer. If anyone out there that's hearing this is an EQEmu pro and can either help me figure out how to set my server up again with this new change that was apparently implemented, or if you could just make a server that anyone can use, hell, make 2 or 3 of them, where you can just make yourself a GM like I did and manipulate the game, the zone you're in, whatever, I can start making that lore content again. And that's what I really want to do. Now, to answer your question more thoroughly, by the way, if anyone can help me with that, I would be so over the moon grateful. You can email me, sagefreke1@gmail.com, if you want to help me one-on-one, or if you want to just set up a server where anyone can make themselves a GM and manipulate whatever zone they want to. That would be great as well. That way I don't even have to worry about it. It would be nice to have my own. I would take either at this point. All right, so when my computer died, I actually had started recording some content before then and writing a script for a new lore video that I never ended up finishing. No, it was not the Teardal or the Trolls, and I'll be honest, that isn't really my favorite area of lore. I mean, perhaps eventually I would get to it, and honestly, the Teardal stuff, I haven't done a super big deep dive on it. I do find some of it a little bit interesting, but the lore video I was working on at the time when my computer died and when all this EQEmu drama started happening was actually on the Shisar. Now, I know what you're thinking. I hate Lucklin. Everyone hates Lucklin. Why would you do a lore video about Lucklin? Okay, not entirely about Lucklin, first of all, because the lore video started out on Kunark, just like the Shisar did. Second, even the Lucklin part of the Shisar is actually really interesting. Now, I will admit, not the biggest Lucklin fan. I don't hate it as much as some people seem to, but I think the Shisar were the most interesting part of that expansion. In fact, Temple Stragia is easily my favorite zone in Lucklin, and I think it stands up with a lot of the like Temple of Ishan, Karnors, Sebelis type stuff. I really do believe that. I think the Temple Stragia and the Shisar storyline is A, really interesting, and B, the saving grace of that expansion. Now, I'll admit, the more that I started looking into the Akiva stuff, I got kind of into it. Like, I know, Vexthal, there's certainly issues with Vexthal. But I actually think the lore of the Akivans is kind of interesting. But I never started making a script or anything for an Akiva video. Maybe someday I would, if I can get a server up and running again. But the Shisar, definitely. I actually think that that is a really interesting lore, and I would love to do something with the Shisar eventually, because there's this whole drama. Obviously, the Green Mist stuff and how they got to Lucklin in the first place, but then there's also the Visdra the Cursed in the basement, and how you get her, I think it's a her, to spawn. Visdra's angst toward Emperor Sragia. There's this like rivalry within the Shisar. Not quite Civil War level rivalry, but something like that, like an uprising. And I just found it really interesting. I wanted to do that. And there's other things that I would love to do. I really do like that Coldane video. I know I'm kind of tooting my own horn, but it's to this day, it's my favorite video I've done. I did enjoy, by the way, speaking of my old server, I did enjoy the level 10 video on this channel, or on this walkthrough, I should say, with Janes, where I went to visit Bertoxilus and talk about Bertoxilus. I did that on the EQEmu server that I used to have. I couldn't have done that without that server. I can't go to Plane of whatever the hell, Disease, what was it, Crypt of Decay, to show you Bertoxilus on P99, obviously. And even if I could, he wouldn't let me just stand there right in front of him like he did in that video. So, speaking of lore videos, the other video that I did on this channel that I, to this day, really enjoy from a lore perspective is the one where I did the deep dive on the Velius letters, the letters from Velius. I just love those letters, and there's so much nostalgia wrapped up. Anyway, we've hit level 41, we've gotten through the hell level. That's our Q&A. I did 3 Q&As, I haven't done one of these in a while. I hope that answers the questions for now. I do have other questions that I'd like to get to at some point, but I think for now we'll stop at 3. Thank you for watching, we'll be back soon. And yes, Project Quorum stuff is in the works. I think I mentioned this earlier, but I was on a hell level on Jane's, and my character on Project Quorum is also on a hell level, so it's been a hellacious EverQuest experience for me lately. But we're finally done with this one. I'm almost done with the one on Quorum. I'm going to work on that next. Bye.